Hello, it's Lori from Cut and Paste Craft Studio, and I'm coming to you today with our latest canvas painting. This is the one for adults, teens and tweens, or for an adult helping a child. If you're looking for the YouTube video for the kids canvas, you're going to be looking for this one. So if you've signed up for the kids canvas, go look for the other video. But today we're going to be painting this one. You should have in your kit the canvas already traced, like mine is here. And you're going to have a set of paints. They are numbered. I will refer to the number as we go along so that you can be using the same color I am. However, this is your canvas. If you decide that you would prefer his hat to be red and his coat to be green, you are welcome to switch it. You can also lighten a color with a little bit of the white paint, or you can darken it with a little bit of the black. If you've got your paints and everything out, you're also going to want a bowl of water because we've got to wash and dry our brushes. You're going to want some paper towels. You have two brushes here. I'm going to tell you which brush I think is good for a particular spot on the canvas, but if you feel like I'm using one that's too big or too small, you're welcome to switch. Using the bigger brush will reduce the number of brush strokes you see. Using the smaller will allow you to get in and do more detail work. You probably you'll obviously use both of these. One of the nice things about this brush is it does have a flat edge, and there are several ways you can use that flat edge, and I'll be showing you that as we paint. You can bring the edge of the brush right up to the line you want to paint and then pull down, and that'll give you a nice smooth edge, or you can use the flat edge to sort of draw your line as you go. Now I'm painting on an easel so that you can see what I'm doing, but you'll be wanting to paint flat, and when you are painting, you're going to want to rest your brush either on the table, or rest your hand either on the table or the canvas so that you've got more control. If you are painting up like this with your hand not braced on anything, you're having to use your whole arm to paint. If you've got your wrist braced, you're using just your fingers, and you'll get a lot more control. You also are going to be much more successful if you limit the amount of paint on your brush. Never, never, never get the paint all the way up here to the metal part. You want to keep the paint way down here, maybe even only, if you're doing big open spaces, you might go a third or the halfway up your brush with paint. But if you're doing something little like this, you're just dipping the very end of the brush in there. Keep your brushes in with just a small amount of paint on them, and it'll also be a lot easier to clean those brushes when you're done. So, or even between colors. You don't get your brush wet. We always start with a dry brush and go straight into the paint. I've got my paint out on a palette. You may have yours in the little containers we gave you. Either way works just fine. So I'm going to start off with the canvas. Now you may find it a little bit tough to see my lines, but you'll be able to see your lines just fine. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting things that don't touch each other. In other words, I'll paint the hat, and then maybe I'll skip down to the beard and then do the feet, and that way it gives the time for the other part to dry. If you feel like your canvas is too wet and trying to brace your wrist on it, you're sticking it in wet paint, go find a blow dryer. I bet you have one somewhere in your house. And wash your hands off carefully, because you don't want to get paint all over your blow dryer like I do here at the shop. But use your blow dryer to dry things. That way you won't get smearing, and you won't get your hand, deep into the paint. So your paints are numbered. You've got a container of white, a container of black, and then the others are numbered 1 through 6. I'm going to start painting my hat on my gnome with paint number 1, which is this medium sort of green. It's the darker of the two greens. And see, I don't have paint all the way up that brush. I'm going to keep it nice and light. You can paint, the wide open spaces here. And then brace your wrist to get closer to the edges with that. I'm going to reload just a little bit. And you're going to want to, like I was showing you before, take that straight edge and go straight up to the line and then pull away. And that'll give you a good straight line. You can also take that line and very carefully slide it up here. Now, I've done a lot of these, so I have a lot of experience painting, and I paint rather quickly. You will have more success if you paint slowly. So if I get ahead of you, you just stop that video and catch up. Now, don't leave thick clumps of paint. You always want to smooth out that paint as much as you can. I understand it will probably look like it's not covering. That's okay. You're going to paint one coat, go away, work on another part of the canvas, and then when you come back, it'll be dry and you can put a second coat. Never put a second coat of paint on top of a wet coat of paint. That won't do you much good. I'm going to turn my canvas. Make sure you all do that too. If you are feeling like, you're going like this trying to paint, turn that canvas. That'll give you more control. Sometimes I just stick my pinky out, and that is what gives me contact with the canvas so that I am supporting my hand, giving myself a little more stability there. All right, now I'm going to actually go all the way upside down to get this line. You can kind of see he's got sort of a cuff on his hat, and that we're going to use the lighter green for. You could use the white. The only problem is it touches his beard, which is also white, so you need to add a little more of a line there. But if you wanted a white cuff, you could always do that. Okay, and then as we finish this color, I'm just going to go across here and see, do I have any clumps? No, I don't think I do. I think I'm good there. Now, I'm going to finish the hat using the smaller brush. Now, you may feel like you're constantly washing your brush out, but please, 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 when you're not using a brush and it has wet paint on it, dump it in that water bowl. You'd be shocked at how quickly that paint dries, and suddenly you've got a brush that's harder to clean and not very useful to you. So, whoops, I'm going to have to turn again to get the right kind of support I need to do this line. See, I did not fill this pointy brush all the way up. I did not go all the way up to the metal part with my paint. That gives me a little more control. Also, when you're doing a line like this, like I'm trying to outline the edge of this hat, hold that brush straight up and down and don't press down very far. That gives you a nice straight line and a lot of control. And then as you go back to fill in, you can hold that brush more sideways. And there we have the first coat of our green for the hat. Now you can see, I don't know if you can see on mine, but there's some areas that are definitely going to need a second coat. But I'm going to let that dry and come back to that later. And like I said, I'm in a sort of skip and jump down this gnome so that I'm always working on a part that's not touching the part of the paint that's currently wet. And I'm not giving an ad here for North Lime Coffee, but North Lime Coffee is what gets me through this. Okay, so I'm going to skip down to his beard. Now, you're going to want to wash that brush. I like to gently tap my brush on the bottom of the bowl. Don't do a whole lot of splattering around, or if you're painting with someone else, they're going to get mad at you. Then when you dry the brush, don't just go straight up and down, go flat like this so you get the color that's all the way up, as far up the brush as you can clean. If during the painting process your water starts to get really murky, you may find it harder to get those brushes clean. Just go change your water. All right, now we're going to go with the white. And I have filled it up a little bit more because I'm covering more surface here. So you're going to want to sort of brush in the direction that his beard is growing, which is down. And I'm going to do what I call the wide open spaces first. And then I'll come in and do my detail a little bit after. All right, and then I'm going to use that trick. And this time I've just put a little bit of paint on that brush because I don't want a big clump. And I'm going to go right up next to that edge and kind of pull down. I'm going to use the smooth edge of my brush. And see how slowly I'm going? You do that too. Go very slowly and carefully. Where we make messes and go outside the lines and get paint in places we don't want it is when we hurry. And you're not in any hurry because you can pause this video anytime you want and come back to it later. All right, and as I'm doing the edges here, I'm going to constantly keep pulling down the paint like this so that I don't get a lot of brush strokes. This white will definitely need a second coat. When has white ever not needed a second coat? Again, I'm going to go to the edge and pull up. Try to cover up as much of that traced line as you can with the white, and then it won't show as much. Okay, now see how I've been pulling this direction with my paint, so I'm going to go back over it real quickly with a little more paint to pull it down. I don't want to see my brush strokes going sideways across his beard. So you can brush out those strokes once you've gotten all the paint on. Now you may need to, to get down to that point, you may want to switch to your smaller brush. Still bracing my hand. Using that flat edge in any way that I can, either dragging it down or pulling away. Come up and bring this color up. Okay, and then I've got a lot of brush strokes there, so I'm going to, now that I've got the edges done, I'm going to spread those out. Get a little more paint down to this point at the bottom. All right, now that definitely is not covering well enough, so that's not a problem though. We're just going to leave it be, let it dry, and go on. Now I'm going to switch to my smaller brush because I'm going to come down here and do this, I don't know what you call it, maybe the hem of the coat, and I'm going to do it in white. Use the tip to just outline everything. And on this, with this coat and these sleeves and things like that, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be exact. If you want to make the cuff, if you go a little outside the lines and it makes that hem of your coat a little bigger, that's okay. Try to smooth out any big clumps that you have. And again, that's not going to cover very well, but I'm going to show you a technique a little later once this coat is dried, because I'd like that to look a little fluffy. So I'm going to show you a technique a little later on how to make it fluffy. Now, I have not drawn them on here, but I'm going to add some little cuffs onto my sleeves. So if you would like sleeve cuffs, just makes that coat look warmer to me. There we go. All right, let's look back up here. Yep, that green is good and dry. Now, you probably can't tell from here, but look at your own. In the center here, I feel like my paint has covered really well. It's the edges that have not gotten enough coverage. So I'm going to go and just add a little more of this green paint #1 to the areas where I feel it's not completely covered. And since the paint is now dry, you're going to see it It's like magic. It just suddenly covers up all those brush strokes. You don't have to do a second coat. I just think it looks more finished if you do. Again, I'm using just a small amount of paint on that brush. So I have to go reload now and then, but that's okay. Just a little bit up here at that top. All right. I think that's some good coverage there. We will let that darker green dry, and I think my beard is fairly dry up here at the top, which means I can go, I'm going to skip right now to color number 4, which is that flesh tone, and that's what his nose is going to be. Now, I can tell you right now, this flesh tone is not going to cover that blue. And I think in my sample, I actually did 3 coats. Now, this is a case where I'm using the big brush, but if you want to use your little brush, you can. Just be careful with your brush strokes. Oh, all right. I'm going to turn him a little bit so I can get in there. All right. We'll leave him be for a little bit. Now let's see. Yeah, I think most of that white is dry enough that we can move on to our red, which is color number 3. We're going to do the coat. So that's going to be these sleeves and this coat part here. Oh, I could have done the mittens earlier. Well, we'll come back to the mittens later. Red is one of those weird colors that's fairly bold and bright, and you think, oh, it's going to cover beautifully, and it just doesn't. It's a very sheer color. Red, all of our reds are. All right, I'm finding this a little awkward, so I'm going to change the angle of my canvas so that I can do that line there. All right, and then I'm getting a ton of brush strokes there, so I'm just going to take my brush. You can use it kind of at an angle and spread that paint out. And then I'm going to flip the other side so I can get the other half of his coat like this. Now, again, the way I angle my canvas is not necessarily going to be the way you need to angle it. So just because I turn it sideways, you might need to turn it all the way upside down. You adjust your canvas to fit what works for you. If you ever feel like, man, this is awkward, then you need to flip or turn. All right, and then I'm going to smooth out that paint. All right. Then I'm going to switch to my smaller brush because those sleeves are pretty small. But again, you know, only fill that brush about 1/3 or 1/2 of the way. Use that tip for outlining. Paint slowly. I'm going to need to turn this way. Sometimes it's not really obvious which direction you need to turn. All right. And I've got that first coat. Oh boy, is it obvious that's a first coat. That one really, really, really needs the second coat there. But I think now our nose and our beard are dry enough up here so that we can add the cuff to that hat. Get all the red out of my brush. Now I'm using, for this color, I'm using the lighter green. In your paint, it's labeled number 2. It's a color called Desert Cactus. Oh my gosh, it's my favorite green because it covers in one coat for everything. If I could get every paint to behave like Desert Cactus, I'd be so happy. Now look how pretty that color is. If you would like your mittens to be in this Desert Cactus, you're welcome to do that. In my sample, I used the darker green, and I'm going to take my small brush, use the very tip, and outline that mitten before I go in and fill him up. Now you see this little black part over here. There's a little line. You could either paint over that or paint around it. That's the handle to the little lantern he's holding. You can just paint around it. If you get a little paint in the middle of it, that's okay. Black covers beautifully. So, all right. And then let's see what else is ready for us now. Oh, we can do the black on the, I almost said tires, the black on the shoes right here. Again, you could do your boots in green if you wanted. I'm going to do mine in black. Ooh, boy, this black covers beautifully. So one coat should do it for these little boots. Well, I'm getting a little brush stroke over there that won't go away, but that's okay. We can just come back and touch that up with a tiny bit of black later. All right. Let's go ahead and put the second coat of red on our gnome here because I want to mix up a lighter color red a little bit later, and so I want to make sure I don't ruin all the red before I need to, while I'm still needing it for the coat. So my red coat was plenty dry. Okay, I just went outside the lines here real quickly. I'm going to show you a technique. I put a Q-tip and a toothpick in your kit. You're going to take your toothpick, dip it in a little bit of your water, squeeze it off so you only have a tiny bit, and then gently wipe it over wherever you went outside the line. And the faster you do it, the more quickly it'll go away. But I have found it's better, when you make a mistake outside the lines, it's better to take the paint off than to try to paint it over. Because you will find there's a lot of colors that don't color. White will not cover up red, even no matter how many coats you put on there. So it's best to take it off first. That goes for painting wood in our shop as well. Take off the paint. And even if you think, well, I'm going to ruin the background, you know, even if you had taken a little of the white off or the whitish blue off there, you could have easily fixed that more easily than you can paint over the red. So don't worry about taking the bottom color off. You can always go back and fix that. I apologize if you can hear the noise. We're getting new neighbors next door. It's a carry-out restaurant for healthy food, believe it or not. And they're hoping to open up in mid-January. So if you hear that saw over there or the drill, I apologize. All right, yeah, that second coat of red just does wonders. I'm gonna flip my little guy here so I can get to this sleeve more easily. And again, guys, I am painting really quickly so that you don't have to watch a 2-hour video, but you pause when you need to. Now, we've got a little ornament up here hanging from his hat. I did that in a little bit lighter shade of red. So what I did was I get my big brush here, and I'll use it as a scoop. You can use like the lid to your white paint or the lid to your black paint. Just be sure you wash it off before you put it back on the paint, if you're going to keep these paints. I've probably given you too much paint, so if you want to keep any of these paints and use them for other things, you feel free to do it. I am going to take a good sized scoop of my red right there. Then I'm going to wash that brush off. Actually, I'm going to switch brushes. That makes it easier. Then I'm going to stick my clean brush in my white. I don't want to contaminate my white. And I'm going to put it in the red and just swirl it around. Now, I've gone a little more pink here. You could go with just, you know, the plain red, or you could add a smaller amount of paint. Now, this is way too much paint to be painting with, so I'm going to wipe that off. Don't have to wash it because I'm using this same color. And then I'm going to take my small brush and this new pinky color I've made. Again, I got really pink here. You may want to, if you get yours too pink, add more red to it. But I just wanted to have a slightly different color for my ornament here. When you add white to a color, believe it or not, it covers better. All right, there's my little ornament. He looks a little plain. We will go back and add some more features to him. But wash that brush up really well. I'm going to wash out my bigger brush, my flat edge brush. It is time for us to add some second coats here. So we will go into the white and add our second coat of white to his beard. Now, probably if you wanted this beard to be pure white, you would need a total of 3 coats at least. But I'm gonna give my beard some dimension by adding some gray to it. So I don't need my white to be as perfect as you would. Now, if you choose to have a pure white beard, then you may want to add a third coat of white instead of adding the gray accenting that we're going to do in a little bit. Oh, this is so much nicer once we get that second coat on. Let's get down into that corner. Uh-oh. I don't know how that happened. Obviously, people, I did not get my brush dry enough because I just had a little bit of water dribble down. See, even experienced painters make mistakes. When I'm trying to do these edges, I always make sure I have less paint. I don't want a huge clump left behind there. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. Now, I told you I was going to show you kind of how to give a little fluff to the white that's at the bottom of his coat. And I think it'll help distinguish it a little bit from the background as well. What I'm going to do is take my flat edge brush. I'm going to go straight down into the paint so that I have some, just on the tip. And then I'm going to pounce, kind of. I'm going to push the paint on to this cuff. And I always tell you, don't leave big clumps of paint, except right now I want you to leave a great big clump of paint. And you're just gonna keep doing that. Until you get some texture there. All right, I'm going to come a little closer. Can you see that texture? And we can do a little of that, just a touch. Go straight up and down and give his cuffs there a little texture. There we go. All right. Our nose is still looking pretty blue, so I'd say it's time to give him a second coat. It's amazing how much better this second coat covers in this particular color. Whoop, I got way too much paint on that brush. Always wipe it off if you load it up too much. All right. Now I'm going to add some texture to my beard. We're going to use the smallest brush, the pointy brush. Give yourself, use your fingers to twist it a little bit. Give yourself a fairly nice point, and then just barely. Can you see the tiny amount of paint I have on that? It is not much. You just want the barest bit. And then you also want a very light touch. This is one place where I would tell you don't brace your wrist. You're going to hold your brush like this and just, if you want to, take your paper towel and practice that. See how light I'm going? Just barely touching down. Did I just cover up what I was painting? It's hard for you to see. So again, you just want maybe a quarter of the brush filled. And then I kind of hold out here on the very end, and I'm just going to barely touch. And I'm going to kind of follow the direction that his beard kind of goes. You might want to get right up to the nose a little. And you give him just as much gray as you'd like him to have. and then you stop. And that's all the gray. Oh, and by the way, gray was color number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Color number 5. Let's see, we still need a second coat on our gloves. So we'll go back with that darker green. Of course, if you went with the lighter green for the gloves, you probably don't need a second coat. You were probably smart. All right. Now, my gnome is standing in the snow, and right now the bottom here is looking a little blue. So that's how we painted the background, and that's okay. We want a little of that shading to show, because you know a snowbank is never just solid white. It's always got some color to it, but some shadows to it. But I'm going to give a coat of white over top of this. Doesn't have to be super thick, but you kind of want to cover up that line that we've done with the tracing paper. If it shows through a little bit, that's okay, because that just gives your snowbank a little definition. And I'm just kind of brushing out here. I'm just giving this a little more idea that this is actually a snowbank. But see how I've left some of the blue there? And I'm going to go up, try to get around. You don't have to get too close to that black, because we are going to do a little shading with some gray later. But there we go. See how the background, the snow ground, is much more defined now. We are going to go back with a little gray a little later. But that'll be an optional step. Well, actually, all of this is optional steps for you guys. You can always change it around. Now we're going to do a little bit of work with the black. Now, this is a lantern right here. If you have a good black paint marker, a plain black Sharpie is not great for this. But if you have a good paint marker, you could do this with a paint marker too. If you aren't able to, if you don't have one and you really don't want to paint this, you know, you can always come into the shop and borrow one for the day. They're just too expensive to send them home with a kit. It would have brought the cost of the kit up too high. So, but I'm going to paint mine. And obviously your lantern does not have to be perfect, but the key in painting this is to keep a tiny amount of paint on the tip of your brush. And while you're drawing a line, hold your brush almost straight up and down. If you have to keep loading it, that's okay. And the handle goes right through his mitten. And there's a little curl on the end of that handle, just like that. Then this is sort of the ball on the top of it, and there's a little knob there. Then I'm going to do the outline. And you know, if you get a little outside the lines, nobody but you knows what this lantern is supposed to look like. So, you know, I always tell people, when you do something like a canvas painting, and maybe it's your first one, or if you're doing wood burning with us or something like that, how people perceive what you did is often depends on how you market it. So I always say, you take that canvas painting and you show it to your loved ones and you say, oh my gosh, look what I did. This was my first canvas painting ever. Can you believe that? And they're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You did such a great job. So always market yourself nicely. Don't say, ugh, I'm so terrible, I messed up this lantern. There's a little curved piece. I'm getting a little outside the lines here, but I'm not going to worry about it. All right, and then when I painted the sample, I colored in this blob at the bottom. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think it's the stand for the lantern. But when I looked at it more carefully, I realized it's supposed to be outlined. So you can choose to outline that or fill it in. Now, much later, when this is dried, I'm going to show you how to do the little glow of the lantern on the inside. We're going to use the yellow, and you're going to need your toothpick for that. But while we have black on our little mini brush, let's turn our canvases. Well, I'm going to turn mine. You do however you need to. And this is where we're going to do our fir branches that are coming in. And again, you don't have to go straight where the lines are. You're using a small amount of paint on your brush. Ooh, I got it really out of control there. Try not to make them too thick, so don't press down really hard. And just kind of follow that line. There we go. Flip, nope, I think I'm going to need to stay that way, sorry. Making you all dizzy. And then I've got, on the tracing I just did one branch here, but I'm going to do another one right there. And then, make sure you just have a tiny amount on that brush, and you can do the top of that ornament and the little hook. There you go. Now, as we were up there on that ornament doing the hook, I realized I haven't done a second coat of that red, or my pinky red, whichever you used. So I'm going to do a quick, try to stay away from that black so you don't smear it into your ornament. And there we go. Now we're going to add a little shine mark to that later so he'll look a little more finished. Actually, we're going to add shine marks to a lot of things. But I still think my nose needs a quick third coat. He's still looking a little blue. Maybe his nose is cold. There we go. And now I'm going to start on, I'm going to show the sample back up here to you. I'm going to start on his hat. This is all free-handed, okay? Don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It's not that hard. Please look at my swirl there. That is not a perfect swirl. Your swirl is not going to be perfect. So take a very close look at mine and see how everything is uneven and not perfect, and the white doesn't completely cover, but it gives a really cool effect. So this is where you definitely need to not judge yourself too harshly. Okay, so back to how we're going to do this. Make sure that pointy brush is very, very clean. And again, I am only doing a single coat for everything I do on this hat. This is going to be, it looks a little sheer, but I think that looks, I want this hat to look like it's knitted. And I think you get that effect when you paint like that. So I'm going to brace my wrist here. And with your pattern, sort of follow the line that you get from the cuff. So you kind of want to go, and see how I'm a little thicker there, a little thinner there? Not a big deal. It's a hat, it's squashy. The stripes are going to look thinner and thicker. Again, we're using just a little bit of paint on the tip of our brush. And now we're going to do some little X's. Get that paintbrush out of my way. Now I like to start my X's in the very center. Again, they're not perfect. And they got a little smaller as they went toward the edge. Some of them are darker than others. There we go. Super easy. And yours, again, it's the overall effect, not each individual X, that you were going to judge by. Now, my next step, I did a double line, just because I wanted to come up with some interesting things. And then, if you've ever painted with me, you know this technique. wrong end of your paintbrush. Now I'm going to use the bigger brush because it has a bigger wrong end of my paintbrush. I'm dipping that straight into my paint, and I'm going to start making some dots. Now you'll need to load up again about every second dot because the dots will get smaller if you don't. And I did sort of a staggered design of dots there. All right. I did a thicker line for this next bit. And then I went into the dreaded swirly. You could do a zigzag. You can do this. And look, it's not perfect. Mine doesn't look perfect. Yours isn't going to look perfect either. So give yourself a break. Then I did another double line, and you guys remember, you stop at any time if I'm going too fast. If you want to take more time with this, if you are a perfectionist and your hat has to be the same pattern as your mother's favorite scarf that she made you when you were little, then you do that too. All right, and then I'm going to do another line up here, and I think that's about where I stopped. Now you could continue this pattern on up. You could do dots all the way down the line. You do it however you like. But add a couple. You can start repeating your patterns. So like I might do another set of little X's there and then another of that. But then I might stop there because you're getting a little too, it's getting a little too small to do a pattern that's going to be recognizable. While I've already got white loaded on my brush, let's do a couple of other things. Let's do a little, what we call a shine mark, kind of the reflective mark there. You're sort of doing a flick. You start and then let up as you get to the bottom. I did a little bit of a shine mark around his nose. Might do a little shine marks on his feet like that. All right, now we're going to do our fir branches, and I promise you these are not difficult. They really aren't. It's all technique and it's layering. I've actually got, grab this up here for you. I've actually got 3 layers of paint on each of these fir branches, but they're just a quick psh, 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 psh. We're just putting paint on the very edge of our brush, and then we're kind of like this, like flick, 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 flick. Okay, so let me wash my brush off, make sure he's good and clean. And I'm using the flat edge brush. You could use the pointy brush and do little flicks to get that, but I think the line looks straighter and smoother and more like a fir branch if I use my paintbrush. Now look at each branch. Your fir needles are going to go down on each side. So you're going to cover each side with little marks, and you want them to go down. So even here, this is heading down. This, you've got to go up a little bit, but keep it close so it's not, sticking straight up. All right. We're going to start with color number 1. You've got a perfectly clean brush. You are just barely putting paint on it. Can you see that? Just a touch of paint there. Now, all of these little fir needles look different. They're all going to be different thicknesses. You're going to reload at different times. Hey, nature is like that. The fir, your pine needles are going to be, they're all going to look different. So, you know what? I may start up like this so you can see what I'm doing better. I am basically just touching the brush to the canvas and pulling it a fraction. Flick, flick, flick. Can you see that? I just put my brush, oh, I can't, I'm in the way. But I promise, I am Let's see if I can turn it in such a way that my hand's not blocking what I'm doing. Here we go. Maybe you can see this. I am touching the brush to the canvas and just lightly flicking it a tiny bit. The longer you flick it, the longer your pine needles will be. All right. Sorry, it is, at this angle, difficult to keep my hand out of the way. You're going to do that on each of the branches, how far apart you put them. And see what I said? You want the general feeling that the pine needles are hanging down, but of course on the top part of the branch, you've got to come out a little bit, but you don't want them sticking straight up. Reload your brush now and then, but again, keep it a small amount. Now these look pretty plain, don't worry. We're gonna, and see I'm going further down with these because these are the bottom of the branch. And come over here, set the brush down and flick, set, flick. And now mine over here are getting a little fatter. Well, fine, that's a different tree over there. So he has fatter pine needles. Don't fret over these too much. It's not each individual pine needle that's important, it's the overall look of it. Now I'm going to brush that, whoop, just bang the camera there. I'm going to wash my brush off, and we might let those pine needles dry a little bit. I'm afraid I'm going to smear them if I immediately go on to the next step. So let's do a little shading down here on our snow. Snowbanks have a little bit of shadow to them in places. I also think by doing some shading, I can still see my traced line here on the edges. I also want to put a little shadow under the shoes. So I'm going to use this, it's color number 5. It's the gray. I'm loading my brush a little bit, but I'm going to wipe most of that paint off, okay? I want just a tiny bit of paint. And then I'm going to lightly, oh, still a little too much. I'm going to lightly brush a little gray, just kind of along that edge. See how I've taken almost all the paint off, so I'm not getting a sharp line of paint. I'm just getting some gray there. Now I'm going to reload my brush. Take a little bit of it off again. It's always better to start with less paint. You can always add more back on. And I'm going to do sort of a swishy line underneath my shoes because he kind of made a shadow there where he's standing. And then I'm also going to shade a little bit in the corners here. Get a little gray. My snowdrift has a little shadow to it. If you want to add a little more dimension to it right there, you can. But we've added just a little bit of gray. Just makes that snowbank stand out a little bit better. I think that green up there is drying up enough. Just setting a little bit. So I told you we are going to layer these pine needles. And it's actually pretty easy. You're going to take color number 2. You're going to load that brush with just a tiny bit of paint. And then you're going to do the exact same thing. You want to be almost on top of the pine needle, but offset just a little bit. So I'm going to choose to go just below the pine needle. But you want some of that darker green to show. You don't have to be perfect at this. If you get above the needle a little too much or right on top of it, just don't fret it. See how suddenly my pine needles have a little more dimension to them? They're not just green streaks on the canvas. And again, there's no perfect here. reload just a little bit, but again, keep this really, really light. Oop, I got a little out of control there. That's okay. Don't worry about it. All right. I think I've got the accents I like there. Now, we are not done. We are going to do one more set of coat of paint over those pine needles because in my canvas, it is snowing. And actually, the day that I am filming this is November 30th, and we had snow today, and I wasn't expecting it. But it looks very, very pretty out there. All right, you're going to do that tiny, tiny bit of white, just like before. I got actually just a little too much paint on my brush, so I'm going to take that a little of it off with a paper towel. And this time, go over the top of the needle. And I'm not using a full stroke, I'm just doing a little bit. So you've kind of got the white on the top, the darker green in the middle, and the light green on the bottom. And that's just adding a little bit of snow. All right, and I'm going to add a little bit of white on the top of, oh, I've got a little too much white on my brush there. If you do that, just wipe it off. And don't worry about a little too much snow on one of your branches. And folks, I promise we are getting to the home stretch. There we go. All right, there are a couple of last things that we're going to do to add some detail to this. One thing, you'll see it on the sample, but I have not drawn them on here. I want to show you how to make a snowflake. And you can add as many of these snowflakes as you want. Take your pointy brush, get them good and clean. Use a small amount of white paint, just a very small amount, and you're going to draw an X. All right, and then you're going to cross that X, but make those lines a little shorter. And then to give your snowflake a little more design, you've got some choices. I'm going to choose to put a little V on the end of my short cross bits, and then I'm going to put dots on the ends of my longer cross pieces. And you can mix that up, you can turn it sideways, you can angle it however you want. I am getting just a touch too much paint there. But always remember, just do the cross and then go across it. And then you can add whatever design you want to the end. We're also going to add some berries to our our trees. I'm not sure which fir tree it is that has these red berries, but it just looks really cute. Now I'm going to use the bigger brush because it has a bigger wrong end. I'm putting that wrong end in my red paint, and I want the berries to be a little bit bigger than what this dot is, so I'm just going to take it and run it around in a circle a little bit. And I'm going to put clumps of 3 berries on those. Try not to rub your hand into your snowflake like I just did. All right, and then I'll do maybe a cluster of them up here. All right, clean off that end of the brush. And we're going to use the Q-tip, not the Q-tip, the toothpick that's in your kit. You're going to take the bigger brush. You're going to use the wrong end. By now your lantern here should be good and dry. Get a big old clump of this yellow and pop it right here in the middle like that. Now I made sure I had tons of paint on there, and there's a reason for that. I want my light to shine a little bit, so I'm gonna use my toothpick and drag the color out a little bit. There we go. There's my shining light in the middle. One more little technique that I think I like. I want to add just a touch of white. I want my berries to have the tiniest bit of snow on them, so I am using, oh my gosh, the tiniest bit of white on the top of my brush. Now you probably should wait longer and wait till these berries are a little drier. But I don't want to keep you here all day, so I'm going to go ahead and do it now. And then one last thing that you can do, add lots of snow to the area. If you didn't want to paint your snowflakes, you can just start adding falling snow. And you can do that with the wrong end of your paintbrush. You'll have to reload every once in a while, but it's kind of nice to get all different sizes of dots here. You might want smaller dots here at the bottom, bigger ones at the top, maybe a few in here. That one got a little not round. Well, I think that actually looks kind of good. I think that one got a little crazy there. There we go. And there we are. That is our gnome canvas. You have gotten through the whole thing. So congratulations. I hope you really enjoyed this. I hope it was a lot of fun. If you've got any spots where you're seeing, you know, maybe I've got a little red that needs touching up right there, this is the time to do it. But don't fret on it too much. Sometimes less is more. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye.